Welcome, Susan and Stephanie, to our Asian American and Pacific Islander month for the month of May. I'm glad to have you guys here to be interviewed about what it's like being Asian Americans as planners. So, if you guys can introduce yourselves, but before you guys do that, I do want to let the audience know that you guys are sisters, Asian American sisters here in Florida that are both planners, which is quite interesting. So please introduce yourselves.
Age before younger sister. Oh, she's frozen up. I guess
Stephanie, you want to go first?
sure. I'm Stephanie Thoburn, Stephanie Ajoc Thoburn. Um, I'm a planner.
Hey,
Um,
Hawk, I'm with the. Oh, go ahead. You froze there for a minute, so I don't
okay.
know what.
I'm a planner for the town of Jupiter in Florida, and that's close to Palm Beach County.
Okay. So I'm Susie Ahawk. I'm with the city of St. Petersburg on the west coast of Florida. And I'm the director for community services. We focus on neighborhoods, volunteers, and an assortment of other activities related to community engagement.
Oh, I didn't know we were talking about art credentials. So I'm the assistant director of planning and zoning. And basically, our department is in charge of long range, current planning, historic preservation, environmental resources, um, development review, and all those things in between.
Awesome. So can you guys tell the audience a little bit about your background, your family background?
So we're Filipino American. Our dad is a retired Seabees. So
Navy.
so he traveled more so than we did. I mean, he was gone on deployment for long periods of time. Our mom was a medical technologist. Well, actually, technically, she was a pharmacist, and then went into medical technology, and then she worked with HRS. Both since retired, enjoying retirement. They are in Jupiter some of the time, so they're there with Steph and her family and the grandkids. Um, it's been we've moved quite a bit over the years. So we went from California to New England to Mississippi, and then my father's final assignment was in Florida and
In
uh,
Jacksonville.
Jacksonville, Florida. So been a little bit of all over. And as a family, we always like to travel, so pile us into the back of the station wagon, and we go and visit the 50 states. And so
We are first generation American to touch our feet here and be born here in the United States. Our grandfather, my father's father, and his four brothers were all in the United States Army during World War II. And they fought in World War II and died in World War II as United States Army soldiers, and did not set foot here in the United States. So, we come from an extremely patriotic family and are very proud of that fact. So a lot of effort was put into my sister, and then me. The second kid always gets away with more, but she she was the valedictorian. She was always she was the student regent for the state, um, on the board of regents. And so I had a big shadow cast over me while growing up, but we were pushed to our limits. Again got away with more than she did because I wasn't the valedictorian. But I had more fun. But we were definitely pushed to, make a name and keep our good name intact, since we're first generation Americans.
Thank you guys for that.
Sisters. My sister's much more creative than I am in terms of, she's got more of a background in terms of design and some of the artistic skills, that and once you find out a little bit more of my background in terms of starting with the city of St. Petersburg, it's funny I ended up there versus my sister, because I don't draw. Oh, I think part of it is just to mention that when I came to St. Pete, it's funny, my sister being more the artistic one, the division I ended up in when I came to St. Petersburg, which was urban design. So, and I don't draw. I need a ruler in order to draw.
But what was you had a dual degree, your
I had
back?
a chemistry. My undergraduate is in psychology with a minor in chemistry. Didn't finish chemistry. I needed, I think, one more class, but the physical chemistry just about did me in. And then went on to a master's in planning. I kind of fell into it in terms of planning. And I think the piece that really appealed to me was really more of the citizen engagement portion, more so than some of the more of the traditional planning.
Awesome. So the question that everyone wants to know is, how did you guys get started in your career? How did you guys as sisters both decide to, do the same field, to be part of the same field?
Well, I'm older by a couple years. So I went to the University of Florida, and so I'd been working a number of years while Stephanie was still in school, and then decided to go on to graduate school. I'm going to let her talk about how she came into planning, as she went into landscape architecture is what she started with. So when she was at the university, obviously I had already gone and was working in planning in St. Pete, and she was starting her work in the landscape area. So Steph?
Well, I wanted to be a fashion designer. And I could draw and I could sew. So it made sense, and I could make my own clothes. And then I realized, after talking to my father, who was always very pragmatic, I said, Daddy, what would you like me to be? And he says, Steph, I don't care what you do, as long as you do something good for the community, basically. That's not exactly what he said, because he wouldn't have said those words, but he basically said give. And so I went into design. I went into landscape architectural design. And because I'm used to receiving hand-me-downs from my bigger sister, I moved into her old townhome at the University of Florida and decided, okay, what can I do to take over her hand-me-downs and move it to the University of Florida? And then when I got into landscape architecture, I recognized that I just didn't want to design from a small from individual sites, but I wanted to understand and use the design knowledge that I had for the bigger picture, for cities and for functions and movements. So that's really how I got into it. It didn't happen because I was following her footsteps. It just happened because planning is such an expansive field that you can be a planner and do so many different things.
Right. And I'm more engaged with neighborhood planning, neighborhood development, and all of those activities associated with it. So I interact with many of the departments throughout the city, from engineering to planning, obviously transportation, water resources, stormwater, because each of them touch our neighborhoods in different ways. And obviously they want to be able to connect with them. So really I wanted more of the engagement piece. So that's what I'm doing. And that's what I have been doing for the last almost 31 years with the city.
Okay, so moving along into the next question, you just answered it, Susan, about how you guys been working in the planning field, and can you guys give a little bit more background on some of the jobs that you've had over the years?
I started as a entry-level planner, and I was in the area of urban design. And then the city decided to move into neighborhood planning. So we started in the neighborhoods and then moved up was promoted to planner 2. And then the form of government changed in St. Petersburg and a new office was created. It was called Neighborhood Partnership. And the role of that neighborhood, as the former mayor at the time, David Fisher, would say, we'll go out and find out what the neighborhoods want. And that was our original function. So we moved over into that office and then was promoted to manager and then director. And then with the change of administrations, actually 2 administrations after that, neighborhood partnership responsibilities became broader. And rather than calling us just neighborhood partnership, we became community services, but it's because it included a lot more activities like the youth for workforce readiness. We have a pet friendly initiative. I have responsibility for public right-of-way complaints. We have staff that go out to take a look at those, financial stability and financial inclusion efforts, as well as our neighborhoods and volunteer activities that we're engaged in. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, my 31 years with the city.
I've been with the town of Jupiter since 1996. And so coming up on 25 years, it was my job out of college. And I started as an entry-level planner as well. And at that time, we were a small community of about 28,000. And now we're we're 67,000 people, and that swells during season. We have, and planning and zoning, we're just like a regular department, long range and all that. But we started out with development review, and over the course of us developing the town, we built, for example, Abacoa, which is a 2,000 acre mixed use development that was originally planned by Duany Platter Zyberg. So taking that concept and then having those ideas throughout the town and developing, pedestrian friendly and walkable environments. And then also later on being able to take on our natural environment and the environmental standpoint. Now we have approved an open space bond. We've approved 2 open space bonds, and the town is, we oversee about 110 acres of land. And then we also have private environmentally sensitive lands that we oversee as well. So, we're doing environmental resource management. And then in the last 10 years more so, as we've approached build out, where my department that I oversee is in charge of historic preservation. And today I was actually dressed up in to give a tour to some school kids at our 1915 train depot. And I was dressed up as a 1915 era garb. And one of the big things that I came out with was, why do you think kids that I'm dressed this way? And they said, and I was wearing all white and, long sleeves, long dress. And they said, oh, because, it's historic. And I said, yes, but I'm wearing all white because I'm a suffragette. And 100 years ago, women could not vote. And it just blew these little kids' mind to be like, to say 100 years ago, your mom could not vote for the president, for the mayor, and we couldn't vote. And so that's why we were protesting and wearing white. So it was really interesting to have some of those, connections of the past, interjected in today's, reality. But yeah, that's some of the fun stuff I get to do,
Awesome. It's good to know that there's some people out there that have been with one city for a long period of time, because that's not common. We usually see people jumping from place to place. So thanks for you guys providing that information. So moving right along into the meat of the conversation. So the reason why we're here today is to celebrate Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month here in May. And the idea behind us having this conversation is to talk about some of the issues that you guys have had in your career as relates to being Asian Americans. So moving into the first question, so tell me about your experiences working as an Asian American in the planning field.
Well, I think one of the things also is that obviously my sister and I are both female, being Asian and female, and the stereotype, I'm not as slight as my sister. I was maybe in past years, but maybe not so much now. But the stereotype of a young, even if you are older, young, small female, Asian female in particular, that you're more likely to go along. You're a little bit more subservient, and you're not likely to put up any kind of protests. I think it's kind of is a stereotype that's out there, and have run into instances where somebody, whether they've made some kind of suggestive comment, or I'm heading someplace, going someplace, and somebody says something along those lines. I mean, I've had that, unfortunately, I've had that situation happen, and you just kind of ignore it. You just move along. I don't know, Stephanie, if you've had some similar instances with the, I guess, kind of that traditional stereotype of the, the petite female Asian in your workplace.
I've experienced that to some extent here, but I mean, for context, I work in the community that I'm in is wealthy, homogenous, so it's predominantly white, and sometimes there, you run into famous people here. So the level of those types of people, they see you and they make assumptions right away with just one look. They look at you, and the typical subservient Asian, quiet, not going to make any waves kind of person is how you get perceived when you walk in the door. But when I asked my colleagues here, the other planners in my office, well, how do you see me? Do you see me? Do you see Asian American on me? Do you see that? Do you see that I'm Filipino? And they, one of them said, no, we just see you as Stephanie. And I
would probably say that between both of our co-workers would probably say neither one of us are quiet.
But I think part of this is that, when they see you, they automatically think, okay, well, there's inexperience there or a lack of knowledge. And so you have to play catch up. You have to, like, you have this real need to try to show people on a regular basis that you know what you're talking about, that you have your facts in line, and you better make sure, if you're going to argue, that you know what you're talking about before you come at me. You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, it's just a very, it's a very defensive almost way of being. I mean, and it's not meant to be, obnoxious, really. It's meant to be more of, well, I don't want to be seen as a dragon lady, I don't want to be seen as that person. So then what do you do to, address that? What do you, how do you react to those things otherwise? So it's a constant, it's a constant work at of how you're perceived and how you present yourself, especially being women.
Right. Well, the other part of it is there's also an assumption that, I mean, I've been approached where somebody has said, "Oh, are you a nurse?" Or, "Oh, I was at a neighborhood meeting with my administrator, or actually he was my director at the time. He was facing the resident, so my back was to him, and the resident said to my director, 'Oh, is this your secretary?'" I was the manager of the department at the time. So, I mean, the youthfulness, whether or not it's because of being Asian and looking younger than we really are, plays into, as my sister talked about, that sense of we're not as experienced as some other individuals that may look older. Well, we may have the genetics that keep us youthful. I mean, I've had that comment from a number of individuals who've worked with me over the years, haven't seen them in a while, and the comment that they've made, and I've had several people say this: "Gosh, you haven't changed." Well, I look in the mirror and I go, "Yeah, I have. You haven't seen the gray hair, the gray hair, the little extra here, and and all this other stuff." I mean, thank you in terms of that. So on the one hand, but it can really play into that credibility, and whether or not we have the ability to do the job that we've been hired to do. And that, from that aspect, I mean, yeah, my sister made this comment a couple of times that, our parents encouraged us to work harder. It wasn't a requirement, but part of it, I'm sure, is because they've been through struggles, even though they hadn't, although they came to this country, they had to struggle to get to where they were. So they've been through similar things in their own workplaces. So they just wanted us to be better prepared.
Awesome.
Well, we also grew up in the South. So,
yeah, that is something that to keep into consideration. Yes, I can actually, relate to you guys in some way. Being an African American female in the planning field, working at my job for 8 years, I can relate in a lot of different ways with you guys. So, Susan, you started talking a little bit about some examples of microaggressions that you've experienced. Is there anything like really crazy and outlandish that you've experienced either personally or in the field? You and Stephanie have any examples?
Well, I do have a couple of examples. One, I think what was just kind of funny was one of our residents had called and missed a meeting. So I'm talking to her on the phone, and then I said, I gave her an update in terms of the meeting, and then she said, I have an issue that's going on. She told me that she was having a problem with her neighbor, and then her statement was, "Well, you know how those Asians are." And I'm kind of like, she didn't just say that, did she? And I said, so what about those Asians? That's one of those times you wish you had the television phone. Well, why don't you tell me about those Asians? And so she tells me, she tells me what she says. And then I said, well, I've got to go out. Would you like for me to drop this off? I can bring you the handouts that So I went to her door and knocked on her door. And I go, hi, we talked on the phone. And the look on her face was just priceless because, I'm sure she was like, oh, I can't believe that I was telling her about the Asians and this woman is Asian. So, the other one kind of relates to the microaggression is not necessarily from individuals that are different from you. Sometimes they're from individuals within your own group, where I've had individuals where I've shown up again at their door, and they've said, "Oh, you're Filipino," and I'm just kind of, yes, and it was like, "Well, you sound white over the phone," and I just kind of looked at him, and I was like, "What? What am I supposed to sound like over the phone? We're from the everybody's from the United States. Shouldn't we sound similar? What are you expecting me to sound like?" And I'm thinking, go tell your sister that I'm here. But, so, I mean, when we start talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, when we talk about kind of differences, also recognize and bias, also keeping in mind that also occurs within our own groups, and expectations of individuals. I'm not quite sure in terms of how to sound Filipino, because we don't speak the language, but we were also born in the United States. So I could probably give you a list of others, but I'm sure my sister has some as well.
Mine are really short little snippets of, because I'm in the development world, my job is to tell people the rules. Well, the rules get sometimes translated to no. So I've had one lady say to me, can you just go get your supervisor? And then I'll like stop and say, well, I am the supervisor. And then she looks at me, or can you go get a planner? And she doesn't even realize that I'm, a planner. And then, the other one that I've gotten is because, we tell, again, people what they don't want to hear is, you need to fire that Chinese girl. That's what I've heard. You need to fire that Chinese girl. I mean, I've even had a personal experience where a lady I had an altercation with a lady in a grocery store, and she flat out, and it was just because I put my milk too close to hers. And she comes out and says, you need to go back where you came from. And I just looked at her and I said, excuse me? And I'm like, let me tell you where I came from. I came from Rhode Island, and my father was served in the military, and my grandfather and his brothers all served in the U.S. Army. So, and it's just like that constant, it's the constant having to prove yourself and having to say things to let people know that you belong.
So one thing that I know that a lot of Asian Americans deal with is boxing everybody into one group as Chinese or something, or calling them Oriental.
Yeah, that's one that I think I had shared with you earlier about one of our now retired police officers who was of a different Asian ethnicity from me. And I'm not sure how we got into the conversation, but he goes, when people say, but you're Oriental, he goes, I'm not Oriental, I'm Asian. Oriental is either a market or a rug. I'm Asian. So and I think I think with any grouping of people, I mean, Hispanics are all grouped into one. But if you listen to the languages in the Spanish, there's different um, variations of Spanish, and what you may learn in one is not necessarily the same. Within the Asian community, the broader Asian community, there's even more uh, variation amongst the languages, because not all of them are necessarily, probably not built on the others. I mean, they're very different in terms of the language structure. So yeah, no, I mean, we do get that, because I had a Filipino just recently say, "Oh, you're Filipino. I thought you were Vietnamese." And, so like I said, it's easy to get mistaken for another group.
I think the other part on the flip side of that is that, because I live in a pretty, predominantly white area, and I've spent so much of my life trying to fit in, that I've lost some of that connection to my culture. I in preparing for this, I decided I was going to listen to some Filipino music, and I turned it on, and I had it on my, my stereo in the car. I was driving down the road, and I didn't know a single word that they said. And I was just like, this is really, really sad that I don't understand the language. And that's because I grew up in the South, and I've spent my life trying to fit in.
Yes, I can relate a lot with you guys on that. Same thing here in South Florida. There's a lot of different African Americans from different islands, and people like to, say that you're Haitian or Jamaican or Bahamian, and sometimes you're neither one of those. So, yes, I'm very familiar with getting, boxed in a subgroup of a larger race of people. So, how do you guys, and I would like Susan to answer this question, how do you overcome the bias that you have experienced?
Well, that's an interesting question, because it's not, I'm just thinking of a situation that I had where I did call someone out when we were in a group meeting, multiple departments, and he referred to those people. The gist of the conversation is we were talking about the number of Asian residents within the community and some of the needs and things, but he said those people. I called him out in the meeting. I ended up going, I ended up the next day, I was called by internal affairs for the police department. And I'm thinking, just for saying those people in this meeting. But apparently he must have talked about it, and word got around to internal affairs. I mean, there are times that may be appropriate to really to say something there, and say, that's kind of a stereotype. That's not, that isn't right. But it depends on what the situation is. Sometimes it may be it may be best to pull that person aside and say, that really bothered me. That hurt, for you to say something, for you to say that. It really varies in terms of the context of it. In that situation where kept referring to those people, my comment was, those people, you people, those people, me people. I said a comment like that, not quite sure in terms of who you were referring to, but what you've done is you've set some people aside. So apparently this officer's had some issues, and that's why I was called over to IHS so that they can find out in terms of what happened. So didn't really it wasn't that issue specific, but there were some other ongoing issues. But I think if you're in a situation, you're in a work situation, and people are comfortable in having those conversations, it's appropriate to have those conversations when something comes up. This past summer with staff, with the Black Lives Matter protests, and a number of the other things that had happened over the year, I have a number of individuals that I reached out to specifically to ask them how they were doing, and just to say, so with all the protests, with the trials that are coming up, how are you feeling? Is everything okay? And so we talked about it. And I think that creating that safe place so that people can talk, so that there can be open dialogue versus creating a situation where someone may get defensive, um, it's helpful. I mean, that's the only way that you're going to have the open dialogue. Otherwise, we're going to fall back into our um, stereotypes of being that submissive, quiet individuals.
Thanks for that. And so for you, Stephanie, what can colleagues do to support you as an Asian American?
I think to see me as Stephanie, you know, not to see Asian Americans or Filipinos, but to see our uniqueness and how we're here. I mean, we're actually here because we want to be here. We're in this profession of planning because we want to help. I mean, I think that's the crux of what planners want to do, is that they want to contribute. And if people can see that we're here to help and that we're one of them, I think that's one of the things that we can get support from our colleagues from.
Awesome. I think that's great. So, as we wrap up, our final question, what policies or approaches do you recommend to help others follow in your path and improve their profession?
Well, and I think I mean, obviously, it has to be across the board in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. That you create the safe places where people can um, embrace differences, recognize them as unique qualities. And I think with the, you know, fortunately, with a lot of the things that are going on a national level, people are starting to look to see um, where those implicit biases may be based, in trying to make change to do just that. How do you embrace the differences, encourage everyone to be themselves rather than losing what makes them unique to become whatever the majority population is?
I I think I think that to get to that core of how do you change those beliefs is really, I mean, it's going to sound typical, but is to educate the youth. And so, like, I've been doing things and have been asked by our local college FAU to give lectures, to be a part of a mentorship program. I also mentor another Filipino at the University of Florida, and he texts me. So, to show people and to show young people. And I also volunteer at the Environmental Academy at the high school next door. So like trying to put us out there and show people and show kids that every little bit of what you do makes a difference, whether it's being kind or whether it's being ugly, and it makes a difference. So understanding that and letting people know, and it not coming from your mom, because my kids don't listen to me anyway. So, but like putting it out there, I think that's where, changing what my sister said is to change those dynamics of people and how they grow up. It has to come from when you're younger.
I totally agree with that. And thinking about how the elders are influencing the younger kids to become, who they are today. That is a really plays a really big impact. So thank you guys for joining me today.
Thank you, Gigi.
Thank you, Gigi.
Yes. And so, yeah, thank you for, being here and sharing your experiences as Asian American. We don't hear a lot about Asian Americans in the planning field. I mean, the group of people are obviously, overshadowed in many different fields. So thank you for joining us and hope you all have a great day.
Thanks.
You too. Thank you.
Share.